The skies over Gaza City have once again filled with smoke and the sounds of explosions. On this day, June 30th, 2025, the Israeli military has launched a new and intense series of airstrikes across the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. These actions follow one of the broadest forced evacuation orders issued in months, signaling a potential escalation in the long and devastating conflict. The focus of this renewed military push appears to be on Gaza City, particularly in suburbs like Zaytun, where Israeli tanks have been seen advancing into eastern areas. For the hundreds of thousands of people still living there, this new phase of the war brings with it a terrifying sense of uncertainty and fear of what is to come next. The evacuation orders have thrown an already displaced and traumatized population into further chaos. The Israeli Defense Forces have instructed residents in large swaths of the city to move, but many are finding they have nowhere safe to go. Instead of heading south as directed, a journey fraught with its own dangers and uncertainties, many families are moving west within the city itself. They are seeking refuge in already overcrowded areas, hoping to find some small measure of safety away from the immediate line of fire. The scenes on the streets are desperate, with families carrying their few remaining possessions, searching for shelter in a landscape already marked by widespread destruction. This latest wave of displacement adds another layer to an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Reports from the ground indicate that over 80% of the Gaza Strip is now either designated as an Israeli militarized zone or is under active evacuation orders. This leaves a dwindling amount of space for more than 2 million people to live. The conditions for those who have been forced to flee are dire. There is a profound lack of basic necessities such as clean water, food, and adequate shelter. People are exhausted, hungry, and have lost all sense of security, moving from one temporary shelter to another as the front lines of the conflict shift around them. The military's stated objective is to target Hamas infrastructure, but the reality for civilians is one of constant peril. The strikes have been widespread, and residents report that the bombing is indiscriminate, hitting residential buildings and public spaces alike. An attack on the Al-Baqa cafeteria, a popular seafront spot in western Gaza, killed at least 22 people, including women and children who were seeking a moment of respite. This incident, along with many others, highlights the immense risk faced by ordinary people who are simply trying to survive from one day to the next. The fear is that this is the beginning of a major new ground assault, which would only deepen the suffering. The human cost of this latest escalation has been immediate and severe. In just the hours since dawn, Palestinian health officials have reported that at least 80 people have been killed across Gaza, with scores more wounded. The relentless bombardment has overwhelmed the remaining, barely functioning medical facilities. Places that should be sanctuaries, such as hospitals and schools, have not been spared from the violence. An attack was reported on the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir el-Balah, a critical lifeline for the sick and injured in central Gaza. Such strikes not only cause casualties, but also cripple the ability of doctors and nurses to provide essential care to a population in desperate need. The violence has also targeted places where civilians have gathered in search of aid. In one horrific incident, an Israeli strike hit a food distribution site in southern Gaza, killing at least 21 people who were waiting for assistance. In a separate attack, 10 others were killed at a United Nations aid warehouse in the north. These events underscore the extreme dangers associated with humanitarian efforts. Furthermore, Israeli aircraft have bombed at least 4 schools that were being used as shelters for displaced families, in some cases shortly after evacuation warnings were issued. This pattern of attacks on civilian sites has drawn widespread condemnation and raises serious questions about adherence to international humanitarian law. These recent casualties add to a staggering death toll accumulated over nearly 2 years of conflict. According to figures released by the Health Ministry in Gaza, at least 56,531 Palestinians have been killed since the war began in October 2023, with another 133,642 wounded. The vast majority of these casualties are civilians, including an unthinkable number of women and children. On the Israeli side, the initial attacks on October 7, 2023, resulted in the deaths of an estimated 1,139 people, with more than 200 individuals taken captive into Gaza. The scale of loss on both sides is immense, leaving deep and lasting scars on every community affected by the violence. The journalists who risk their lives to report on the conflict are also paying a heavy price. The Palestinian Journalist Syndicate now reports that more than 220 journalists have been killed in Gaza since the war started, making it one of the deadliest conflicts for the media in modern history. Their deaths, like that of a local journalist killed in the strike on the Al-Baqa cafeteria, represent a loss not just for their families and colleagues, but for the world's ability to understand the full reality of what is happening on the ground. Each death, whether a civilian, a journalist, or a combatant, represents a personal tragedy that ripples outwards, fueling the cycle of grief and anger. Amidst the escalating violence, diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire continue, though progress remains elusive. Egypt has once again taken a leading role, proposing a new deal that would see a 60-day pause in the fighting in exchange for the release of some of the Israeli captives still held in Gaza. This initiative runs parallel to efforts by the United States, which has put forward a similar plan for a 60-day truce tied to the release of half of the remaining hostages. Washington has indicated that Israel has tentatively agreed to this framework, but the success of any deal hinges entirely on securing the cooperation and agreement of the Hamas leadership. From their side, Hamas officials have consistently stated that any temporary ceasefire is not enough. Their core demand is for a permanent end to the war and a complete withdrawal of all Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. They view any short-term pause as merely a way for Israel to regroup before resuming its military campaign. This fundamental disagreement over the end goal of negotiations, a temporary truce versus a permanent cessation of hostilities, remains the primary obstacle to a breakthrough. While mediators work tirelessly behind the scenes, the gap between the two sides' positions appears as wide as ever, leaving the fate of the captives and the people of Gaza hanging in the balance. Interestingly, a notable shift is beginning to emerge within the Israeli political landscape. Opposition leader Yair Lapid has publicly called for an end to the war, arguing that continuing the military offensive no longer serves Israel's strategic interests. He has gone so far as to claim that the army's own chief of staff has indicated that there are no further achievable military objectives in Gaza. This represents a significant crack in the national consensus that has largely supported the war effort until now. It suggests a growing recognition among some Israeli leaders that a military solution alone may be unattainable and that the costs of the conflict are becoming too high. This internal debate is happening as Israeli officials engage with international partners. The Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister, Ron Dermer, is currently in Washington for high-level talks with the Trump administration, likely focused on the path forward and potential ceasefire arrangements. However, the Israeli government remains officially committed to its war aims of dismantling Hamas and securing the return of all captives. The pressure from families of the hostages, combined with growing international criticism and internal political dissent, is creating a complex and challenging environment for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government as it weighs its next steps in this protracted and devastating war. The international community is watching the events in Gaza with growing alarm and impatience. Calls for an immediate ceasefire are becoming louder and more frequent from capitals around the world. Nations like Austria have described the humanitarian situation as unbearable, demanding a halt to the violence to allow for a massive influx of aid. Germany has expressed grave concern over the high number of civilian deaths, particularly at aid distribution points. These statements reflect a broader European sentiment that the conflict has reached a point where the suffering of the civilian population can no longer be tolerated, and a diplomatic solution must be urgently pursued. This global pressure is manifesting in various forms, from diplomatic statements to legal challenges. In a significant development, Britain's High Court recently ruled that the government's continued export of parts for F-35 fighter jets to Israel is lawful. However, the court also acknowledged that there was a clear risk that these parts could be used in actions that breach international humanitarian law. This ruling highlights the complex legal and ethical dilemmas faced by countries allied with Israel. While governments navigate their official policies, grassroots movements and public protests continue to demand that their leaders take a stronger stance to protect civilian lives and end the conflict. As the world calls for peace, the grim reality on the ground continues to unfold. Hundreds of Palestinian families are once again on the move, displaced by the latest evacuation orders. nearly 600 Palestinians have been killed in the past month alone during aid distribution efforts, a stark illustration of the breakdown of law and order and the desperate conditions under which aid is delivered. The humanitarian system is on the brink of total collapse, and for the people of Gaza, every day is a struggle for survival. The international calls for a ceasefire are not just political statements. They are a desperate plea to end a human catastrophe of historic proportions. In this dark and difficult time, a simple and universal hope endures, the hope for peace. For the people of Gaza, it is the hope of waking up without the sound of bombs, of being able to rebuild their homes and their lives, and of securing a future for their children free from fear and violence. For the people of Israel, it is the hope for the safe return of their loved ones held captive and for a lasting security that will allow their communities to heal and thrive. As diplomats talk and armies fight, the shared desire of ordinary people on both sides for safety, dignity, and a peaceful existence remains the most powerful and urgent call to action of all.